I'm Shane White, and this is The Process.
Hey gang, Shane Patrick White here with another edition of The Process. On the last of the Speedball Challenge videos, I'm going to do a adventure strip. I came up with this character when I was in high school, so that was some time ago. But it's a character that I thought I'd revitalize because I was thinking about coming up with an adventure strip and I needed somebody. So I came up with Eric Faust, the Arctic Fox. And in doing so, I'm going to be using Speedball's cartooning kit, which has 6 nibs, a B1, B3, B5, B6, a 100, and a 512. We're gonna bust this open and have a crack at it and see what kind of damage we can do. So I'm assuming, based on everything in this kit, you'll be able to do a comic strip or some kind of cartooning to some degree. And I'm going to try to go through all the nibs to basically show you what they can do. Some of them are a repeat from previous videos, but again, we have the same directions that you can use if you want to learn how to do these things on your own. Let's see, okay, it's the B1. I'm feeling a little hoarse today for some reason. There's no joke after that. Okay. Let's see, that's a B3, just like they said. Next would be a B5. Now these I think are just the lettering nibs. Now I wasn't about to hand letter the logo because you've already seen my hand lettering if you've seen the last few videos, and it's, well, first and foremost, it's not something I do regularly with Crowquill. I will hand letter sound effects because that's kind of fun, and it's nice to have on the art because it feels very artsy, graphic wise. Oh, this one's going to be a problem getting out of there. I'll have to dig a little deeper. Let's get the last one then. Now I can already tell like the last 2 nibs are probably what I'm going to use to primarily ink this story. And that would be the 512 and the 100. Now if I can just get the 100 out of there, please cooperate. We'll use my trusty pincers. There we go. Excellent. And like always, I will quickly wipe these down so that the nibs are cleaned and ready to accept ink. Okay, there's one down. I've been looking forward to doing this last video in this Speedball challenge because it brings together a lot of the things that I already like doing. I do like illustrating comics, and taking this kit on a tour of what I can do, I'm hoping will prove to be productive. Now, I'll show you something that I originally was planning on doing, but there was a scale issue. So this is the whole strip entirely. So that's the whole thing, but I realized I would have to work much smaller than I was ready to, and so I blew it up to what I would consider production size. So if you were growing up in the 30s and 40s, Hal Foster and Milt Caniff would have drawn at this size because they'd be doing like well, the newspapers back then were really large, so they'd be doing twice up artwork. So this is a B6, so this is a lettering nib. And usually in production, the letterer would be the one who would also draw the borders if you were working in comics or comic books. Or if you had an assistant, you would hire them to ink the borders, which I printed out, and you'd have them ink the balloons, and in some cases they'd be doing the lettering, but not always. I'm using my little kludgy mess of the marker cap filled with ink, just because I haven't found anything narrower and deeper to work with. Let's do a couple profiles on this nib in particular, just because I want to see what scale I'm working with. So this is a B6. So that's a really fine point. That's pretty neat. I like it. I might have been able to actually letter the stuff on the other side. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. I don't know if I'm going to use that to letter this though. Maybe I will. What's the next size up from there? That would be a B5. Well, let's find out what that's about. This is kind of a way for me to figure out what my approach is going to be in terms of handling this job. Again, get my blotting paper out. It's a bit more body than I would hope. It's a bit more bold. I think I'm gonna start. Maybe I can outline. Maybe I'll do the word balloons or the thought balloons using this. Yeah, why not? That sounds about right. It's about the right scale too. We'll see. If it's not, well, there's always whiteout. Let's go the traditional route. Now I'm going to try to be more careful than I was with the last several videos. And the other thing I should mention, this is also a 2-ply Bristol board, so it's a nice professional grade board, and it's smooth. Okay, this is much thicker than I wanted, and there you go. Oh well. Now, a lot of comic books and comic strips eschew the idea of thought balloons, and I kind of like them, though I don't like that one. So right off the bat, I'm already not pleased with my efforts. Well, this looks closer to what I was hoping for. See, because it's almost the size of the borders, which I still think is a little too much. You know what? I'm going to switch this out. Because what I might end up doing is going back and whiting that out, showing you how to fix something. We'll see. See how interested I am. I'm going to go one smaller, which means it's a higher number. So this is the B3 again. So let's try outlining the thought balloon here. That's nicer. I like that a look. Nice. Well, looks like I have a winner here. I should have practiced over here, but I'm not sure there's any sort of rule of thumb. There might be, but in the research that I've done in creating comics, I haven't really run across anything about drawing out thought balloons or word balloons. I think mostly it's one of those things that is very individual to the creator. And I think that as long as they're clear, as long as there's enough negative space around the lettering, it'll let the eye rest, be able to be read clearly. Yeah, these definitely need to be redone. Let's try something crazy. I haven't used these nibs with straight edge, the lettering ones anyways. Usually what I would do is I'd tape this down. Let's try to be a little wiser this time. Maybe we test it first. Yeah, I should be able to handle that, I hope. What you're doing is you're trying to get it resting on the silver part. You don't want to get it down to where the ink is, because then it starts becoming a mess. So keep that in mind. And you probably want to use a metal straight edge. Do a practice run just above the line, just to make sure you're in line with where you want the line to go. And always, always be aware of where you last inked. What's interesting is it's once you get the hang of it, it's actually fairly easy to do. Unlike with a brush, the brush has the up and down movement that could sort of vary if you're not steady enough. So now I've got to sort of straddle some wet ink to provide this straight edge, or I could wait until the other areas have dried to do it. Slipped a little bit. I mean, that's the thing about this, is you're gonna make mistakes. It comes with the territory. So it's better to embrace it than to sweat over it. Now these initial thought balloons were pretty careful, not very confident. My hope is if I keep doing this, I would get more energy in the shape of the thought balloon and not have it feel so tedious. Okay, so all those pieces are done. Let me blot this, make sure it's not wet. It's a little bit wet. I guess we can start here. We'll start with hand lettering. should invest in a good dryer for the hair dryer for the studio. It'd be very helpful with my watercolor work too. To help you get better at hand lettering, I've mentioned it before, but lettering on the computer is a great way to sort of bridge that gap from having to do it all on your own. But because I like hand lettering on the final image, I'll print it out and then I'll hand letter it myself so it has a little bit of me in there. Just want to make sure it's not drying out on me. Sometimes it just ends up being more of a guide than anything because your strokes or the way you handle it may run larger and broader than the actual font itself. So keep that in mind. I decided to change it because I was running out of room, which I'm hoping when I get to these areas I have more room to work with, but it's pretty tight. I think I've actually seen comic pages even larger than this, lettered larger than this, so I could be off with my lettering size for these. Some people are just naturally gifted with great handwriting. Guys like Alex Toth, who this would be no problem, and he probably wouldn't need any guidelines whatsoever. Now remember, W's and M's will have a wider construction than most of the other letters. Definitely needs work. Still kind of fun though. You know, this is like watching paint dry. It's not the most exciting part, but when it comes together, that's when it starts feeling real, and that's, I think, what I enjoy about it the most. And what I should have done was lettered it first and then drawn the balloon around it. That way I could account for any squashing and stretching that may have occurred. I think the only other time I've done lettering on a story was for my graphic novel, Things Undone, but even that I used micron pens. I didn't use Crowquill. my goal would be to use brush. Now, back in the day, at comic book companies, people who worked in the production end of the publishing offices would do the borders and the hand lettering, cover paste ups for logos and the like. But now all that's done digitally, either by the letterer or someone on the production staff. Okay, with the lettering done, technically done, let's move on to the big guns, inking the characters and stuff. Now you see how the ink isn't really sticking to the nib. Even though I did wipe it off with some distilled white vinegar, it still needs some coaxing. So, all right. Well, we'll just do the best we can. Try to be careful. So I will start by inking stuff that I don't care about too much. Oh yeah, I remember the 512. This was fun. It's a little bit softer nib. It's very generous. You can pull some really interesting lines. Now, you can do this any way you want to, you know. You can outline stuff, you can fill in blacks as you go, it just depends on your preference. So this setting is north of Russia, so there's going to be snow on these rocks. What I typically do is I like to take advantage of the line weight, press down hard on the nibs. Since I'm inking with pens, I'm going to probably go back in and fill the blacks with a brush. It would just take too long to do it any other way. Got a seagull. When I was doing this originally back in the yonder years of my youth, I was sort of ensconced in comic fandom and learning how to become a comic book artist. And we didn't have the internet or anything like that, so we sought out magazines, of which there were very few at the time. But I was an avid collector of whatever I could get my hands on. And interviews were harder to come by. Back in the day, creatives didn't really share what they knew because they feared for their jobs. That's just the way it was. It was a secret. And you would be lucky if you could become a mentor or be mentored by somebody in order to gain an understanding of those secrets. It was kind of weird stuff back then. There wasn't a need for sharing. There wasn't any gaining to share, because in a lot of cases, the person you shared your information with would be the one who would take over your job once you aged out. And that was just kind of the way of the world at the time. And it is to some degree these days. You know, it's worth noting that at some point you will be training your replacement if you follow the track that you end up in management at some point or in a position of leadership. This is a really, really fun nib. I don't know if I've used the 512 to any great extent. I do remember it from long ago, wondering, why is everyone so hot on the Hunt 102? The 512 is genius. It's also a more comfortable hand grip. So there's some fine detail in there. I might save for the other smaller nib to do a pickup. I'm just kind of exploring how this one works. Getting the line, pushing down. Let's see what feather looks like. It's okay, it's not my favorite. I find pulling the line away from you is less likely to catch than to draw it towards you, especially if it has a limited capacity for turning because of the sharpness of the point. Part of me wants to do this regularly. Be nice to have the script done, sit down every morning, bust out a page a day, and then that's your work. That's your workload. You made your daily bread. But nobody really gets rich off of comic strips. Not in the newspapers anyways. Maybe online. Yeah, I think a lot of those are more manga based. Manga. Wow. This is so much fun. It's almost as much fun as using just a regular pen. Wasn't even sure that was possible. In fact, I prefer inking with these than with a regular pen in some ways because the line is not dead. I can lean into something and express it a certain way. And maybe that's not fashionable right now. But I'm trying to communicate something with you through the line. think I came up with this story this new story, this new version of the story. The old version was terrible, but the new version of the story I think I came up with in about a night. Wrote it out, thumbnailed it out while I was writing. Did a little bit of research to kind of clarify some points. What was interesting is that I genuinely thought at one point I was going to do an adventure strip for kicks. And I had done a lot of writing on this, but I couldn't quite wrangle it into something that I really wanted to do. So when I came up with this little test page, I went back and I started simplifying things, and I think through simplification I started liking it more. I don't know if you're like me, but I tend to want to complicate things a little too much, maybe to find the depth or give myself a lot more options to choose from. But in doing so, you kind of can lose your way. Who knows? Maybe I'll enjoy the end result so much that I can make it a practice. Breaking into comics is already tough enough. Staying in comics is even harder because of trends and where publishers are going with their characters. They're investing in characters these days as opposed to talent, because there's more talent than there ever was, and they're further away across the globe, living in countries where they can afford to work for a lot less. That is the reality that we as artists have to deal with. That's why it's probably really good if you're an artist and a writer, especially for an American market, because you still have to relate to Americans because they're the ones who buy the books. Culturally, there's not a lot to have to translate between anybody when it comes to story. I mean, granted, yes, the stories are universal, but the art is more universal than having to translate the written page. At least for the time being. That will change as we become a more global community, which is fine. I mean, I'm hoping that it also opens up more markets. It's not just a binary thing. The more countries equalize, economically, culturally, or whatever, sure, they lose some of their identity, but they also open up new markets that could be beneficial, but it's kind of a long game. I mean, people of my generation are still trying to figure that out for themselves. Now, as you go further back, try and use lighter and lighter lines and more simplistic detail too. You might not fill in things with black. You might leave them more open. You might simplify the shapes. seagull becomes the letter M. Or a V. Let's do the clouds. Now, originally, this story, I think, or this character was inspired by Wolverine. You know, it's about a guy raised by wolves. Or by Arctic foxes, which is kind of silly because they're about as small as a lap dog, so I don't know what I was thinking. Trying to figure out the best way to do the clouds, because you want the clouds to set themselves apart from the word or the thought balloons. They have to feel like their own thing, airy and fluffy and all that. So. Now there's a plane in the background, which is really small, and I'm not sure. Well, let's just go for it. I'm just going to use a smaller nib, but whatever. I can do it. Now for the plane, I would probably make that black as much as I can, because it's you don't want people to miss it, potentially. Or it would just be a simple color fill. But I kind of want it to be black to sort of have an ominous quality to it. And that's kind of, you know, how you tell a story a little bit more, by what you choose to spot blacks with, how you handle transitions. For instance, it's cold, so he's breathing water vapor, and then that water vapor is transitioning into this next panel, which looks like this. And I can thicken it because it's now closer to us, and it definitely delineates itself from the previous panel, so it's leading our eye into his eyes. We don't know who this man is. It could be the lead character, it could be somebody else. I'm not even sure you find out at the end of this strip. I think it's just more questions. I think what I remember when writing strips, it's always to answer half the questions that you ask, so the reader can keep guessing along the way, so they have something to look forward to. It's called a cliffhanger for a reason. There's ways to do it where it's not so on the nose. In comic books, it's like per page, at the bottom of the page, you ask a question or you set something up, so you answer it at the top of the following page. And that just keeps the momentum moving forward on the story. It's not a rule of thumb, but it's a good storytelling technique. I think it was proposed by the godfather of comics storytelling, Will Eisner. And because there's a shadow on his face, I'm kind of taking the opportunity to push down as hard as I can to see what kind of line weight I can get. And if it sort of leaks, the pen leaks or something, it's at least going to be in the shadow area and I can deal with it better. But it gives me a chance to take it out for a spin, see what it can do. There are going to be nibs and kits that you gravitate towards. We've covered the Style C, the Style B lettering kits. You might even want to draw comics using those, or illustrations using those. We've gone over the mapping kit, which has some really cool nibs, some soft nibs and smaller ones as well. That may be something you gravitate towards. But what's nice about this is that it's getting a variety pack. It's kind of like those candy, those chocolates that my grandmother used to get us when we were kids, those Whitman samplers. You can figure out that, oh no, I do not like anything that's sugar cream chocolates. I'm more of a chocolate covered nut nougat guy. You know, it's good to shake things up once in a while. I mean, change is hard in general, but it's how we evolve and get stronger as creatives, as humans. So we have to find our own inroads to embrace that change. You know, change is harder for some than others. But we know what's good for us, that we should do. Like for me, I wish I was doing more figure drawing than I do now. And there's ways around that. I just need to get out in public more, find a park bench or someplace where I can observe people and get my sketching game on. I enjoy it quite a bit. And it's one of those things too, like if you have a creative block, there are ways around it, and my go-to is to draw and paint from life. As soon as I do that, it's just kind of like, hey, I'm moving, I'm recording what I see in front of me, I'm studying, I'm seeing the beauty, making choices. And that sometimes it unsticks itself and gives you some options to consider. So my light's coming in from this way. I have to make sure everything from the foreground to the background makes sense in that regard. So yeah, I'm probably gonna have to come back and with a brush and fill this in. Now what's interesting about this page, and it's something I try to do when I'm telling stories, is you try to create a focal point on the page and you try to vary up your camera work. So having like one close-up is not a bad idea if it warrants, if the story warrants it. Having a wide shot to establish location and environment is also important. But that also gives you some challenges too. It's like, how do I handle that with this line weight? Like, do I press down harder until the nib breaks, or do I have to bump up to the nib size? So what I think I've learned today is always start smaller than you normally would go, and then you can build up from there. So instead of jumping over to this panel, I'll just do this one. Yeah, I'll probably just do this. So that's me pushing down pretty hard. Not sure that's going to be the right weight. It needs to be a little bolder. These lines to feel pretty good. So see how sharp that is. It's just a better angle for those lines to be executed. So sometimes you do have to go upside down. That's not good. Since this hoodie part is very close to us, it's going to have more line weight. I might have to go back over it again, but I'm going to wait for it to dry so I don't have to worry about it. Now this is also the hoodie right here. It's not as close. Let's do some hair here. I can't really recommend the 512 enough. It's a good alternative to the Hunt 102. It's kind of got the same tensile strength, same feedback. But it's just a little broader of a nib. So it might give you some extra to work with. Okay. For small areas, I will fill in the blacks a little bit. Boy, 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 boy. So much fun. I want to switch nibs and show you some of the other stuff as far as like, you know, finishing off areas. Doing this, I think I'll just switch nibs. I think you get the idea. So I'm choosing the Hunt 100. We'll see what that's all about. I have a feeling it's not gonna hold a lot of ink. It might be a little too soft for my needs. Now the Hunt 100 is so smooth and tiny. It does not give you a lot of ink to work with, so you have to be very careful. And it's especially annoying if hairs get in the way, because it can be a nightmare to deal with. But I'm really eager to try to make this work. Do some short strokes towards me. It has, like, if you're uncomfortable with a brush, this is probably the next best thing. But it's going to react like a Winsor Newton Series 7 number 1 or aught, because it holds so little ink that, yeah, you're going to be dipping your pen just as much as you would a very small brush. I personally use a Winsor Newton Series 7 number 2 for most things. I have friends who use number 3, so on. But yeah, this is plenty for me. There we go. Do a little extra on the birds. The birds. And I just have to figure out where else I can. Wow, you get some nice fine detail in there. That's the thing, it's like you're trying to find opportunities to scale your detail. That way it creates some level of interest. Sometimes it's hard. But if you have to fight with a pen, it's even harder. So, like the teeth, for instance. And get some hair. Look at that. Looks good. Maybe. Looks like I put my hand in that too. I'm putting my hands in everything. Yeah, well, it's the way of the world. Yeah, this is one of those nibs, unlike the 512, that can get away from you. If you don't have a steady hand, it will show you who the boss is. It's very expressive. Of course, you can do effects in both black or in white gouache. It just depends on what you're more comfortable with, what kind of effect you want to do. Some people use Zipatone or the halftone screens that they cut out and put over, which a lot of mangaka artists use. There, so there's that. This guy is hidden in shadow, some shadow. I don't think I've ever fully inked a comic page. Still haven't, even after this demo. I don't know if anyone would be interested in it. I think it's probably like watching paint dry. I don't know. Maybe I think I would on some level. As long as it was sped up and cut well. Yeah. Now for something like this, I would definitely have to come in here with a brush without ignoring the marks I had made before. Try not to. Okay. I think I would also make this black. It gives the panel some weight. And because this is supposed to be an eyelid, I would have to make that white and then color it differently after the fact. It's a cliff back there, which, you know, I could do some rock type texture. Since this is a foreground, let's take that mistake and make it into something that works better. Like that. See? Okay, for the most part, I think that it covers what I wanted to cover. I mean, these are the nibs, you know, they work well. Of course, I can go back and fix a lot of these things with gouache. You've seen me do that before. But for the most part, I think this gets you to where you need to be. I think the light is coming from this direction. So this is going to be a bit thicker. But yeah, I think this Speedball cartooning kit is pretty able to handle most of your needs. Get that in a brush and you have yourself a full-on comic studio right in your pocket.
As always, thanks for watching. And also, don't forget to subscribe to The Process. And please, if you have more questions, feel free to leave a comment below.